Hey everyone, I'm Tom and this is Ben, and we're the hosts of Real Recovery Talk podcast. We've been getting a ton of inquiries about cotton fever, and that is what today's episode is going to be about. So we've been getting so many inquiries about cotton fever. I feel like we have to discuss this in detail. It's kind of crazy because it's something that's fairly new to me. I'm not a IV drug user. I'm a drinker, so I've never had that experience with cotton fever. I mean, it sounds like it is the flu times like 20, but people are sending us messages saying, am I going to die from this? My loved one, I think they've experienced this. We really don't know what to do or what precautions to take. So I guess, what I think we should do is really just kind of explain what it is. What are some of the things that people can do about it? And if it gets too bad, where can they turn? What can they do?
Well, first off, let's talk about what it is. And I've got personal experience both with having cotton fever and also watching others go through it. Being in recovery as an IV drug user, it's something at some point, if you're in the game long enough, you're going to experience it. But cotton fever, basically, it's a bacterial infection that gets into the blood. The bacteria lives in the cotton, and through the process of shooting up, it gets into your blood through the injection process. So generally speaking, what happens when an IV drug user goes to shoot up, the cotton is often used as a filter, because if you stick the needle into the water with the substance in there, the needle, being a very small gauge, can get clogged up. So what the cotton does is it filters all the soot and all the cut or whatever might be in there that could clog that needle up. And those sources of cotton are often Q-tips, cotton balls, a cigarette butt can be utilized. So it's understandable that some sort of bacteria could get into that. I mean, shooting up in general comes up with a lot of risks. But basically speaking, that cotton has the bacteria in it. It gets injected into the blood. That can be scary if you don't know what's happening.
So you had experience with it. What was that when you had that experience? Kind of walk us through what that was like.
So I had a personal experience with getting it one time, and I've also watched other people go through it. Getting it myself, my experience was a little different than what I witnessed. But what I do recall in my case was really I effectively got high from heroin, and I remember kind of nodding in and out from the effects of the drugs, but at the same time, I remember just a pounding headache, like excruciating, a lot of chills, fever, and it really didn't make sense because in ways it mimicked like the flu or withdrawal symptoms, but as an experienced IV drug user and heroin addict, I was like, this is not withdrawal, because I'm high at the same time, but it was a scary process, and for me, the heroin, I actually ended up nodding out, and my roommates had found me. They had actually said, and what they told me is that I had my door closed in my room and they could hear me like moaning, but I don't remember this. I guess I was laying in bed, sweating profusely, moaning out loud, and that when I came to eventually, time frame I'm very unsure of, maybe an hour or so, but they had actually ran to the pharmacy because they were experienced IV drug users as well, recognized that it was cotton fever. They were quite a number of years older than me, had been shooting heroin years longer than me, so clearly they had experienced this themselves, but they came back with like Tylenol and put a washcloth on my head, etc., and they were kind of, in essence, being humanitarian heroin addicts, taking care of their fellow heroin addicts.
They were looking out for you.
Yeah, right. And so that was my experience with it, and coming to it's. I personally, other than the pounding headache and the odd aches that, while it mimicked the flu and heroin withdrawal, at the same time I knew something else was going on. And they told me, oh, Ben, that was cotton fever. Okay. And on the other hand, I also watched a significant other go through it. And to be honest with you, I was more scared watching my significant other go through it than actually going through it myself. Because I was watching her. She was shaking nonstop. complaining of a headache. She got to the point where she was like, take me to I think I need to go to the hospital. No, I don't need to go to the hospital. Yeah, I do need to go to the hospital. Sweating. Looking back, and for me, recognizing it was cotton fever, I explained cotton fever to her, and she was so afraid because one of the symptoms of cotton fever is actually anxiety. So I imagine the heightened symptom of having cotton fever of anxiety, plus just the anxiety of not knowing what's going on, it kind of compounded itself. But I'm watching her go through it, and I tell you, I was more scared watching her than going through it myself. It was an interesting experience, to say the least.
So when you were going through it, like, did you, or maybe when you were watching her go through it, what was running through your head? Like, what should I do? Because somebody shaking profusely like that, I mean, I know I would look at that and think, oh my gosh, they're having a seizure. I don't know. So what's going through? Because it's almost like you're going to panic and, rush them to the ER. But then it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not something that serious. So what should people do? Like if they're watching somebody go through this?
So one thing to point out is drug addicts in particular are very, very hesitant a lot of the time to call an ambulance to take somebody to the hospital. I'm not going to, I want to throw it out there. We should preface, we are not medical professionals, so I would never say, don't go to the hospital. If you think something's wrong, I wouldn't recommend trying to diagnose yourself with cotton fever even after watching this video. But with that being said, seek medical help. But in my case, I watching her go through it, it went through my head and her head, oh my gosh, if we go to the ER, they're going to know that we're doing heroin and we're going to get in trouble. Our families are going to find out, whatever the case may be. The police are going to follow us home. Very paranoid, knowing that everything that we do is illegal. But basically, through the research that I've done and through experience that was passed on to me, using something such as Tylenol and anything that can relieve flu-like symptoms is helpful. It is said that it is not fatal. Through all the research that I've done, I've never heard of anybody, through my street knowledge, dying of cotton fever. It typically will go away within 24 hours. I would say in my experience watching my significant other go through it, it probably went away in about 8 hours. For me, I think it was a little bit shorter, even probably like 3 hours total, 2-3 hours, and I'd gone through it. So it will go away. If you have some sort of symptomatic experience where you got something going on beyond that, I would definitely take a trip to the hospital. Not to mention, if you're getting cotton fever, that's basically saying, hey, I'm an IV drug user, and I've got some other things to be concerned about as well. It's not a healthy habit.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we want to point out, that cotton fever isn't like, because somebody could look at this video and say, oh, well, it's going to pass in like a few hours. So I'm just going to ride this out. Ben and Tom said this is going to pass in a few hours. We're not here trying to minimize cotton fever. We have to look at what, we're an IV heroin user. So that is what's bringing cotton fever on. I think a good way of looking at that is, I just got cotton fever. I really don't want to go through that again. On top of any other consequences that an IV heroin user undergoes. Let's look at the issue at hand. I'm using heroin. I'm shooting it IV. That is really what we need to get a hold of.
Oh, absolutely. And not to mention the risk factor in general. And for heroin addicts, any drug addict or alcoholic, it's not the if, it's the when. We start, when I first got into IV drug, well, let's say this, I never thought I'd get into IV drug use. First I would snort my Roxys and Oxycontins, and I'll never do heroin. And then I progressed to heroin. I'm like, well, I'll never shoot heroin. And next thing you know, I'm shooting heroin. And eventually one day, I'm never gonna, I went probably a good 11 years without ever sharing a single syringe. Year 12, one day I needed a syringe. And, next thing you know, for the first time ever, there I am pushing that envelope just a little bit more for the first time, using somebody else's syringe, a dirty one. The thing is it's kind of funny. It brings out the insanity of the disease of addiction. You were talking about the inquiries we get. I'd gotten a phone call from a girl who was watching her boyfriend go through what sounded like cotton fever to me over the phone. And she wanted like a direct, what do I do, and expected me to be able to give her advice that would fix it over the phone. And the conversation kind of segued into, well, have y'all ever thought about getting help? And the girl says to me, oh, well, we've actually gotten a little bit better. It's not that bad. It's not as bad as it was. And I'm like, wait a minute. You're calling me out of fear because you don't know what's wrong with your boyfriend, who sounds like he has cotton fever, not to mention everything else that could come along with that, Hep C, HIV,
Overdose.
Good one. Exactly, the obvious. But basically speaking, let's step back and take a look at this. That's the insanity of it. Oh, it's no big deal. Let's just shrug it off.
Yeah, and it's very common for a drug addict to, when the pressure's on, to minimize really everything that's going on. Like, okay, you answered what I needed to know, but when the pressure's on, they, retract and minimize. Well, it's really not that bad. Super common, especially amongst IV heroin users. It's like, well, I only shoot up maybe 1 or 2 bags a day. I do it recreationally. And it's crazy because it's like, at what point do we understand, like, I'm sticking a needle in my arm, I'm shooting heroin. We have to understand that this is a real big issue. And I've had cotton fever. I've had the consequences. I've had overdoses. Maybe I've had abscesses in my arm. I remember you sharing a story with me once about a girl that had an issue with an abscess or something.
Oh man, you want to talk about scary? I'm glad you brought that up. I went against. It was my very first time ever going to treatment, and I met a lady in there, young lady that I decided to get into a rehab romance, and basically speaking, it's spiraled out of control very quickly. But this young lady ended up getting a staph infection, and I've never seen anything like this. This infection she got, her hands were literally, she had sausage fingers. I mean, it looked like something cartoonish. Her arm was like ballooned out. I remember going to the ER and the insanity of it. The doctor was basically preparing us. Her mom lived up in North Carolina, I believe it was. So I was the only one allowed into the ER. I mean, it was pretty darn serious, and they were discussing having her arm amputated. And I will say that the doctor barely saved her arm. Like, it was an absolute miracle. I can't even explain in words what the visual of the swelling looked like. It was the craziest thing ever. If you've seen the movie Requiem for a Dream as a drug addict, a lot of them have, compare it to that scene where the guys, I imagine her getting her arm sawed off, But here's the thing, going into the insanity of it, got a girl in the ER, me, the boyfriend, showing up, and she's like, hey, I got a couple caps of heroin back at the apartment. Will you go load up a syringe for me and bring it back? And I'm just thinking to myself, well, actually what I was thinking at the time was, ooh, there's heroin at the house, and she's telling me where it is. So being the good boyfriend, I went to the house and told her I couldn't find the heroin, but it magically disappeared in my arm. But with that being said, think about that. Like, here she is about to lose her arm, and what she's asking me for is a loaded syringe. And to sneak it into the hospital where, man, that would be risky for me. But the whole thing spiraled way out of control. And it comes back to, you'd be surprised, being a recovered IV drug user myself, like, if you go ask IV drug users out there, how many of them have used water out of like a toilet or a sewage drain, probably over half will tell you they have. And I'm not talking about the back of the toilet with the tank. I'm talking about the public ones where all there is a bowl. You try to flush and catch the good stuff that's fresh leaking down the side.
You sound like you have experience with that.
I do, yeah. So, I mean, it's crazy. And if you're an IV drug user, any drugs, alcohol, can end up going really bad no matter what. But just because we're referencing all the bacterial infection, staph infection, all that, HIV, AIDS. It's a heightened risk. It definitely is. So.
Yeah, so again, we're not minimizing cotton fever. I mean, cotton fever, it's going to be very uncomfortable. It's something that you're probably only going to want to experience once, if ever. I mean, obviously, we want to encourage you not to experience it, but if you do, don't take it lightly. I mean, obviously, I'm going to encourage go to the hospital, whether you want to admit it or not. Like the hospitals, they're not going to be surprised seeing an IV heroin user coming into it's funny. I have a friend of mine that actually works in an ER, and they have a code word. It's Gomer, get out of my ER, because of how many overdoses they see come in on a daily basis, how many people they see come in with just drug related incidences, and they're so you're not going to be the only one. Don't have the fear of going to the hospital. If you think something's wrong, go call an ambulance or whatever you have to do. Don't take it lightly, because it could be an overdose and you just don't know. It's not something that you're really going to want to risk.
Let me address too. I also wanted to throw it out there, since I mentioned it earlier, the fear that drug addicts often have of going to the hospital or calling an ambulance because they're afraid the police will get involved. Many states, I'm not 100% sure that it's all states right now, but the majority of states, if not all, from what I understand, have Good Samaritan laws. And if somebody's overdosing, if you call an ambulance, you from what I'm told, you can't be charged for being in possession of drugs if it's to save somebody's life who's in the process of overdosing. So I just want to throw that out there. There are Good Samaritan laws. Do the right thing, man. Too many times I hear stories of people allowing somebody to die right in front of them. Oh, they'll wake up. They'll be okay. It's sad to hear those, and we get to hear those stories all too often working in the treatment industry.
Yeah, in this day and age, I mean, we see it. We see it every single day. People overdosing, passing away, unfortunately. People that we've gotten to know pretty well over the years, and you're running a risk every single time you shoot heroin, because you just don't know. You don't know what's in it. You don't know where it's coming from, and it's really Russian roulette at this stage. So, I hope that answered all the questions that people would have. I mean, we get inundated with these questions all the time. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. My email is tom@realrecoverytalk.com, and Ben's is the same, ben@realrecoverytalk.com. And you can go on our website, and we have all kind of podcasts that you guys can listen to, have access to ton of information. We are affiliated with Rock Recovery Center, and you can access all of our content that we do on Real Recovery Talk as far as the podcast. But if you're more interested about getting clean and you want to explore what those options are, go to Rock Recovery Center, and you can really see what our program's all about, and we can hopefully get you on the right track. If we can't help you here, we definitely can find somewhere that can.
Yeah, no doubt. And also, if you're a loved one and you're trying to get an addict some help, we have a lot of episodes of podcasts that cover that kind of stuff too. Being married to someone in active addiction, how to find a treatment center, etc.
Yeah, there's plenty of ways to get a hold of us. And again, just want to encourage you to reach out. That's the best thing that you can do, is reach out, ask questions. That's what we do. I mean, this is literally what we do. We've experienced it all. We've gone through it with our families, with our friends, and we've really compiled all of our knowledge and everything that we've gone through, and we're just sharing it with everybody. So I think that's it for this episode.